Please welcome to the stage Tartakovsky, Chief Executive Officer of Epic Cleantec, Manny, Chief Executive Officer of Bain Co, Clegg, President of Global Affairs at Meta, and our moderator for this discussion, Michelle Caruso-Cabrera, CNBC contributor.
Put them out for you, but you don't need to touch those. Don't worry about it.
Hi, everyone. Pleasure to be here. Thanks, gentlemen, for being here as well. This panel is about fostering innovation, entrepreneurship, risk-taking in an age where there's more and more regulation, regulatory frameworks. This is about trying to encourage innovation in that context, trying to work with government to see what can be done to foster innovation. So thanks for being here for this important discussion. Gentlemen, let's start with Silicon Valley, which isn't very far from here. Can Silicon Valley be recreated? Something that was so transformative, that created companies like Facebook, Hewlett-Packard, if we go back even further, back to the storied ideas of creating a business in a garage. Can it be recreated in other places in the world? Manny? Manny's with Bain Company. Do not confuse it with the private equity firm. This is a consulting firm, and he's got deep views into companies all over the world and in all different industries.
Yes, thanks, Michelle, and thanks for all for being here. I've lived in the Bay Area for 35 years after growing up in Manila, and this wasn't created. Sort of, it happened, that perfect confluence of events of great universities, and a venture capital ecosystem that was developing along the way, R&D, and so it was the mold. And so now the question is, and I know many countries try, is can you recreate it with intentionality? And that is happening around the world, especially in some of the APEC countries, with the right combination of governments focusing on the places that their country has a natural source of advantage. Indian IT services in Bangalore, you've seen a version of this. You see this happening even in my old homeland, the Philippines, where you take advantage of populations, including diasporas in other parts of the world, connecting to Silicon Valley.
And what are they doing? They're providing incentives, they're changing regulations, they're concentrating people in a certain place. I mean,
You have to do all of the above. You have to actually be intentional in building the R&D systems, the capital systems, building the educational systems and the talent, so that investment will come in, and the venture capital, the startup, the scale-up community will accelerate. And we do see that example. So I do think it can be created.
Nick, what do you think? And when talking to you, I spent a lot of time covering Europe, and the way business people think about US regulatory frameworks versus European regulatory frameworks is, in the United States, everything is permitted until it is prohibited. In Europe, everything is prohibited until it is permitted. Is that an accurate description, do you think? And is that one of the reasons why we see far more creation of very impressive tech companies coming out of the United States versus Europe?
I think it's a relatively fair caricature right now, but it wasn't always the case. I mean, if you look at the way that GSM standards drove or facilitated in Europe explosive innovation from companies like Ericsson and Nokia, which at the time were world leaders. I mean, the world moved on since then, but I mean, this is all so fluid. I think things can change relatively quickly. But right now, I think it is probably fair to say that the European Union is investing a lot of effort and energy into, in effect, regulating other people's technology. And if you look at particularly the recent sort of jumbo pieces of regulation, the Digital Markets Act and the Digital Services Act, all of which, by the way, have totally laudable objectives. I'm not commenting on the objectives, but I think it is true, as per your caricature, to say that it principally affects, well, as it happens, a lot of big companies which were first fostered and grew here. And I think going forward, I mean, I used to be yesteryear, I was a member of the European Parliament, and I spent many years also working in the European Union institutions. And I think going forward, my hope as a European would be that all that energy that has gone into regulatorily clipping the wings of other companies beyond Europe should also be invested in fostering the circumstances in which European and meaningfully large-scale European companies can flourish as well. And some of that, by the way, is just doing quite dull but important spade work to make, in Europe's case, the digital single market a reality. At the moment, it's more of a promise than a reality. If you're a startup tech company in Helsinki, you simply cannot ship your online products across the European Union as easily as it is to ship an online product from the West Coast here across the United States, or from Guangzhou across the whole of the Chinese market, for a whole bunch of reasons. Cultural, linguistic, legal, licensing, IP, and you name it. But that was always the promise of the European single market, is that it would emulate the kind of scale, the domestic scale, that the US and Chinese markets had. And my view is that remains the big challenge for innovation in Europe.
So with the knowledge that this is an APEC audience.
Yeah. Well, you asked about.
Yeah, I asked about. So the model that if you're a regulator in the Asia-Pacific region, not doing that is probably a good idea. Not following that model is the idea.
I mean, at the moment, everybody's having many debates here about what guardrails should or shouldn't be introduced on AI, particularly generative AI, and these galloping developments of these new large language models. And interestingly, in the G7 meetings hosted by the Japanese government in Tokyo and Kyoto just a few weeks ago, I was told by numerous Japanese decision makers, I thought it was smart. They said, we want to plot a middle course. We want to avoid instant knee-jerk regulation, which you sometimes see in Europe, but also we think kind of legislative paralysis, which you see a lot in DC, is not appropriate either. And I think it's interesting to hear many voices, particularly in the APEC region, saying, like, we don't need to take an off-the-shelf.
They're cognizant of.
Yeah. You don't need to take an off-the-shelf paradigm from either Europe or the US. The future is going to be is in the Asia region, in the Asia-Pacific region anyway, and that should be a future built and designed by the needs of the APEC region, not as a sort of hand-me-down approach from other jurisdictions.
So everybody's probably familiar with Manny's company, Bain Company, and everybody knows Meta as well. Epic Cleantec is the company that Aaron founded and is the CEO of. You started in toilets. So tell us what Epic Cleantec is, so people know where you're coming from, and how you can talk about innovation and also the regulatory frameworks around the context.
Sure, happy to. And talking about bold ideas at APEC, to invite the entrepreneur who works with wastewater for a living onto the stage is a bold move. But Epic, we are a water technology company. Got our start out of work with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, designing high-tech toilets, but now we are focused on deploying water recycling solutions into cities around the world. So 14% of all potable water on this planet is used by buildings. Almost no buildings reuse that water, and that's what we're setting out to change. The way we've designed our infrastructure hasn't really changed in 250 years. It's buildings and sewers and big treatment plants. So we are trying to do what solar did for energy, we are trying to do for water and wastewater. So I left a career in federal politics, and now I am a glorified plumber.
Different kinds of waste.
Different kinds.
Yeah. Let's talk about the original question. Your company's California-based, right? Can Silicon Valley be created somewhere else?
Yeah.
You think?
Yeah. Look, so we were born here in San Francisco, but take my co-founders are Israeli. So take a place like Israel, the startup nation, a small country, but I think you see a lot of the key ingredients. You have a receptive government, you have large university student body, I think all those are sort of the key ingredients. And it's not just Israel, it's not just Silicon Valley. I think we're seeing this pop all over the world. I mean, I think we, for example, are working with consultants in places like Africa, where you have these sort of centers of just incredible innovation, incredible thinkers. And I think the key is just how to unlock that everywhere.
But what are they doing? Are they subsidizing? Are they building buildings for people to all to work together? Like, what are some of the methodologies in which that ends up happening?
I mean, I think it's all the above. I mean, I think, taking a look, for example, at accelerators and incubators, actually creating spaces and mechanisms for these entrepreneurs to come and try new ideas. I think that is actually one of the key ingredients. I mean, certainly in my space, we are seeing sort of a huge growth of accelerators, incubators funded by governments, funded by large corporations, which are giving startups the tools to be able to try new things in a way that maybe wasn't true years ago.
So my next question was going to be, do governments have a role in fostering innovation, or by their nature, are they just more likely to want to play the role of protecting the citizenry and regulating? Jump ball. Nick, what do you think?
It obviously depends from government to government, place to place, but I think in the same way that the sort of almost stereotypical accusation that is sometimes leveled at governments from parts of the private sector that any government activity is sort of a tax and a sort of an inhibition of innovation is clearly wrong. I mean, I mentioned earlier the mobile standards in Europe, which fostered. I mean, look at DARPA's role. DARPA was what, formed in 1958.
DARPA's an arm of the U.S. government, which was very involved in
incredibly
technology.
If you read the history books of Silicon Valley in the 50s and 60s, I think most people would accept, as has already been said, there were lots of ingredients: people, talent, money, universities, finance. But DARPA's role was instrumental. So I think it can definitely. But equally, the reverse is also not true, which is the government perception that somehow private sector flourishing is not possible without government stepping in. It's almost always a sort of hybrid. On the whole, in vibrant market economies, states can provide stability, rule of law, can foster human talent and education, can determine who can come in and out of countries. These are incredibly important ingredients in order to lay the groundwork for innovation and for economic growth. And it's a political choice, which is exactly what plays out in elections, about whether, as a government or as a politician, you say your priority is to find that magic ingredient of growth, or whether it is your priority to protect citizens from perhaps the inequitable consequences or manifestations of that growth. That's what politics is, and that's what divides politicians, and that's why we have democracy, raucous democracies, and that's what people argue about all the time.
I will say there is the different mechanisms by which governments can both foster or stifle innovation. Governments don't act generally in concert on one thing, maybe some do. You can create financial incentives. That's the most obvious. This country created the greatly named Inflation Reduction Act to attract climate sustainability investment here, or the CHIPS Act to bring semiconductor manufacturing here. And then you regulate at the same time, right? The U.S. is trying to say, right, well, what do we report on scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions if you're the SEC? You can create operational, actually organizational incentives. So all of the above, I think, if balanced and done right, to create an innovation economy is doable, but it has to be intentional and trade off innovation with all the other things governments are trying to do to protect their citizenry.
Aaron, with Nick and Manny, we've been talking about kind of high level, what you'd call national, maybe federal. You must be dealing with local city councils, very, very local municipal areas. Is there a playbook there for working with government?
I mean, let me give you an actual example. Here in San Francisco, California broadly, we went from drought to drought to drought. They're more frequent, more prolonged, and our city officials came together and said, we need to do things differently. Why are we using the fresh water from our national parks to flush the toilets of, X's employees in downtown San Francisco? why can't we use recycled water for those sources? And so San Francisco actually came together, and it was a combination of government, the regulators, and the private sector who said, let's create a new plan where every single building over a certain size is going to have an on-site water recycling system. All of these buildings can recycle up to 95% of their water. But the challenge is, whether it's with water, transportation, healthcare, a lot of these very highly regulated industries, this is not an app. You can't just launch this and then iterate on the app store. I mean, all of these are industries that have direct implications to public health. So you need government, you need regulation, but you also need some bold thinkers who are willing to try new things. And so here in San Francisco, the Department of Public Health, the Department of Building Inspection, the Water Wastewater Utility, the Mayor's Office all came together to create this new framework, this playbook, as you said, which is now being copy-pasted to cities, states, and actually countries all around the world. I mean, we as a company get visited by delegations all over the world, largely from Asia, who come here and say, look, the rate at which we are urbanizing, 70% of the world's population will be in cities by 2050. The rate at which we're adding new buildings to our global building stock is like another New York City every single month from now until 2060. We have to do things differently. And so we've created these playbooks that now other places can copy-paste so that our cities can remain livable.
Let's move on to AI. The previous last two panels have been about AI to some degree. The next panel is definitely AI. You want to stick around for that. But the transformative power of AI, Manny, you see so many companies. Can you talk to us about what you're seeing and what it means for the future, and how you think it's going to interface with regulators?
I do think this wave of generative AI, AI's been around for a long time, actually generating real content, it's real, it's being taken seriously. We work with probably the Global 1000. It's not an exaggeration to say most large global enterprises and investors have some program to harness the potential of this technology to either play offense or defense for the company, and depending where they are. Defense, improve productivity in many of the obvious use cases, marketing, contact centers, knowledge assistance, coding assistance. They're seeing benefit, and part of the reason you see some of the valuations, which we can come back earlier, is because the benefits are real. And then the fact that it will reset the entire technology stack, potentially, from the semiconductor layer to the application layer to the picks and shovels of people trying to support this gold rush. It's quite real out there. And the world has seen pretty meaningful technology shifts that actually were game-changing. PC, fixed to mobile, internet, on-prem to cloud. This is arguably as big as all of those or more. Yeah.
Aaron, I see you nodding your head up and down. How's AI going to work out when it comes to wastewater? And do you already see applications where you think it can be useful in your company?
Yeah, and not just wastewater. I mean, I think construction, real estate broadly. I mean, I think a lot of these industries are still run by what I like to call the clipboard army, of people who go and read something, write it down on a piece of paper.
Read the water meter, read the electric meter.
Read the water meter, put it on a piece of paper, take it back, and we all know everyone has a smart device, so we can do things better.
Right.
But in a lot of these industries too, we can do things smarter and actually safer. I mean, in our industry right now, we have these systems that are processing wastewater, producing this super highly purified water, and there's 150 sensors, and we're constantly reading things, and our operators are reacting. But why not take that data, put it into a model, and actually have these systems operate themselves, have these construction crews largely automated and smarter and safer.
So the clipboard army, though, loses their jobs.
No, it does not. I don't believe that. I think there's a whole theory that you actually are able to free people up to focus on sort of more important work, more critical thinking work. A lot of the sort of the monotonous work you can sort of hand off to AI, and it actually frees people up to have more time to be more creative and creates new industries. I think that's what we're discussing at this conference, is how AI is actually going to be able to create a whole new world of industry.
Nick, talk to us about what Meta is thinking about in terms of what AI can do in the metaverse and all the products that Meta has.
To first just emphasize something that Manny said. I mean, people have been talking about AI since the 1950s. If you look at the big Silicon Valley companies, some of the leading research was done by Google, AI research. I mean, if you look at you know,
All goes back to Alan Turing in the UK.
Well, yes, we're going right back now. But if you know, the transformer, which was the great technological breakthrough that in many ways paved the way for what we've now seen, was something developed by Google researchers. PyTorch, which is the sort of AI library which is used by the whole industry, was developed by Facebook researchers. We as a company have open sourced over 1,000 AI databases and models over the last decade. And there's nothing you can see on Instagram or Facebook on your, if you open them, if you fire them up on your mobile phone, which is not already affected by AI. How it's ranked, how we deal with, you know, difficult things like hate speech. I mean, the prevalence of hate speech on Facebook has been cut by about 50–60% over the last, just over the last couple of years. The prevalence now is about 0.01, 0.002% of all content on Facebook for one reason alone, which is AI. Why is it that you can almost find no ISIS or Daesh-related content on the internet these days? It's because not just ourselves, but others have used AI and AI classifiers to identify that content and remove it before any human being sees it or reports it. So it's part of the heft of our online world already. But I agree with Manny. These large language models, I mean, they don't. I think there's been a lot of somewhat breathless hype in recent months, which has somewhat run ahead of the technology. You know, they're not robots with glaring red eyes, which are about to demonically take over the world. They don't know anything. They've got no. I mean, you know, you're just applying a huge amount of compute GPU capacity. You're using large amounts of public data, applying billions of parameters to it, so that these systems, and certainly when it comes to text, for instance, they're predicting the next word or the next token by being able to process these patterns across huge numbers of parameters in response to a human prompt. But they don't know what the word itself means. I mean, so I think we need to sometimes anthropomorphize these systems, which is easy to do. When you ask one of these bots, write me a wedding speech, and it comes up with a brilliant wedding speech, you think it has a certain personality, right, and it feels uncanny. Mm-hmm. But I think it's important to put it in some perspective. It is very powerful, versatile technology. I strongly agree with Manny. I think it's going to have a profound effect on productivity. It's already having a profound effect in lowering the costs of software development to close to zero. I think it's exceptionally difficult to predict with any certainty what the labor market's effects will be. And I remember 10 years ago when everyone was saying there'd be no truck drivers left because all the trucks in the United States would be automated. Well, as far as I read somewhere the other day, there's now a shortage of truck drivers. So it's sometimes a bit of a fool's errand to try and make precise predictions. It's going to be extensive, the effect of this technology, but I sometimes think it's worth putting into some perspective as well.
So you mentioned AI reducing the amount of hate speech. We have big elections coming up next year. The United States, Taiwan, India. Do you see Facebook using AI to moderate content during those elections? And let me ask you specifically, there was a story in the Wall Street Journal 2 days ago that there was a change that actually happened a while ago but hadn't been publicized, that Facebook was going to allow advertisers, political ads, and posters to say past elections were either stolen or rigged. And that's seen as a little controversial. Tell me about that, the framework for that decision. And as we move towards all these important elections next year, how Meta's thinking about that.
So that's a very specific policy. Do you want me to go into it? I mean, it gets into the weeds. I mean, I think the reverse would be controversial. It would be controversial if, when I was a politician for 20 years, I can't remember an election where someone on the right or the left has complained that it was unfair. I mean, go back to 2000, George W. Bush. You know, countless Democrats said it was unfair, it was illegitimate, and so on. So I think it'd be quite odd for a private sector company elected by nobody to say that politicians can't make claims or counterclaims about the legitimacy of previous elections. That would be arrogating to us an extraordinary sort of role of political censorship on something which is constantly debated by all sides of the political debate, and it's not. I mean, I think Google, you can't. This is not on ads, but on sort of organic content. You can make claims about previous elections without being sanctioned. So it's not, and I think this is a policy we've had for quite some time, well before the midterm. So I think it's sometimes worth flipping it around and asking whether you want Silicon Valley companies to stop democratically elected or campaigning politicians from kind of slugging it out amongst themselves. I think in terms of future elections, it's quite different. We don't want people to use Facebook or Instagram to run political ads discrediting, for instance, the 2024 US presidential election. We won't allow that to happen, and that seems to me to strike the right balance between free expression and us as a private sector company getting out of the way of open democratic debate, but not allowing our platforms to be abused to distort how people see upcoming elections. More broadly, I think there's quite rightly a lot of attention has been devoted to whether generative AI could lead to an eruption in deep fakes and other misinformation, disinformation, and I think the industry as a whole needs to be very alert to that. I think it is, as you rightly implied in your question, always worth remembering it's a sword and shield. I mean, it's a highly adversarial space, and yes, AI used by bad actors can pose a threat. It's also one of the most powerful tools. I mean, we have around 40,000 people in our company working on the integrity and safety of our apps. We've spent about $20 billion in recent years investing in really state-of-the-art ways to kind of moderate content. We have the world's largest network of independent third-party fact checkers, way more than anyone else in the industry. But it doesn't matter how many moderators we would employ. In the end, you have to have these sophisticated AI systems to be able to keep up with the sheer volume of content that flows through these platforms. So I think it's worth remembering, like all these technologies, yes, of course they pose risks, but they also pose great opportunities to keep people safe and to deal with content that you don't want to see.
So should regulators be thinking about regulating AI right now? Is it too early? Is it too late? Just yesterday, Gina Raimondo, the Commerce Secretary of the United States, announced that in cooperation with more than 30 VCs here in the Silicon Valley area, and a guiding set of AI safety principles. What do you think, Manny, when it comes to regulating AI? What should the framework be thinking if there are regulators sitting here about what to do right now?
Well, what's actually happening around the world, one of your earlier comments is the regulatory regime, region by region, country by country, is a little bit all over the map, depending on the original caricature, perhaps, that Nick said, if you're the European Union, you're taking one regulatory path. If you're the UK from a few weeks ago, it's not part of the European Union, it's slightly different. US, and then all over Asia, it's not actually clear. This is an APEC, how regulation is playing out, or even Middle East. There's a lot of investment going on into AI in Saudi Arabia because of the amount of energy required for this compute. So I'd say what I'll comment right now is, there is no comprehensive approach to regulation globally, even at the national level. Aaron's comment, there's probably 35 different states in the United States that have putting in some version of AI regulation. So I do bring it back to Nick's comment on the sword and the shield. The investment in the shield. Who makes that investment? Who creates the requirement? There's not as much investment, actually, I'm curious, in shield, in defense against the downside. And is that a natural thing you invest in innovation? Security companies, obviously, and will regulation force that? Because that's how but back to the election question, how much companies can actually protect us from things like deep fakes, et cetera, is a combination of regulation plus companies' capital deployment.
I see you nodding your head, Aaron. Do you want to weigh in on this?
This question's above my pay grade. I'd defer to these two.
Got it. Okay. What do you think, Nick? Is it too early? Is it too late to regulate AI? Should they even be thinking about it? I mean, to what degree are regulators going to stifle innovation if they start to step in? By the way, Mark Andreessen, board member of Meta, came out and said absolutely not. He would not sign on to this AI set of safety principles that was announced yesterday.
Amongst VCs. I mean, I can't comment on the decisions of individual VCs, but I think in general terms, I think the following rule of thumb is perhaps one of the most useful. It sounds simplistic, but it's rather important for regulators as they grapple with this new technology. And you can't, I say this as an ex-politician, it's very fashionable to sort of accuse politicians of sort of in a sort of boneheaded way rushing into regulating things they don't know anything about. But if you're a politician and you have everyone from Elon Musk to God knows who else saying, oh my gosh, the apocalypse
We're all
is
gonna die.
Yeah. It's like this is going to kill us all
Kill
next
us.
week. You go, oh my gosh, I better do something about that. So it's not actually the fault of the politicians this time. It's a lot of people in the tech sector themselves are whipping everybody up. I think in a somewhat misguided way to kind of in this sort of lather of somewhat imprecise panic about this technology. I think the rule of thumb I would pursue is focus on the use cases that you're most worried about, the risky use cases that you think need industry cooperation, possibly government action. So if you look, for instance, at the heart of the voluntary commitments that the White House got a number of major AI players to sign up to in the summer, it was very clearly focused on the possible use of the most advanced AI models.
You're referring to the executive order that President Biden...
It was the voluntary commitments in the summer, which has mutated into the executive order. But my point is, what it was focused on, I think rightly, was, look, there is a potential, relatively near-term possibility that some of the most advanced frontier models could be used to sort of lower, if you like, the safety around bioweapons, around cybersecurity, around nuclear. And that's something where you want governments to work, in hand in glove with the industry. I think where things go a little bit awry is when regulators or politicians try to regulate or legislate or micromanage the technology itself. And that's I think if you can distinguish the sort of use cases of this technology, where it seems to me governments always have a totally legitimate role in saying we don't want those use cases to be endangered by new technology, rather than try and I think this is where the EU certainly, I think it's where they've got a bit stuck at the moment, is because some of the recent changes to the draft EU AI Act have sort of strayed from focusing on downstream use cases, if I could put it like that, from trying to kind of second guess how the upstream technology itself will evolve. And it's evolving so fast, you're never going to be able to enshrine that in the statute book. So I think if you have, and then the other thing, I do think it's encouraging that whether it's in the G7, this so-called Hiroshima process led by the Japanese government, whether it was the International AI Safety Summit hosted by the UK in Bletchley Park recently, the more you can get consistency, as Manny says, the better, because this technology, it's a cliche, but this technology really doesn't recognize borders.
Right.
So the more that you can have a sort of table stakes understanding across the major jurisdictions, the better.
Speaking of not recognizing borders, another issue that has become controversial is that the U.S. has decided to withdraw the demand for the free flow of data across borders, giving our legislators here in the United States the ability to regulate data flow, which could lead to more requirements of keeping data within a home country, et cetera. How do you guys feel about that? Is that good, bad? Is that going to inhibit innovation? It was very controversial in Silicon Valley when it was announced.
You want to start?
I mean,
Go ahead.
sorry, I ended the last one, so I feel I shouldn't start the next one. But
I was going to start with Manny,
all right.
but he threw
I can start.
Right.
I don't, I kind of view it as maybe it's a pullback to evaluate. It's not necessarily yes or no. And I do think everyone's trying, every nation to some degree, as I put it, is trying to balance, or companies too, who are in some cases as big as nations, trying to balance the benefit of free flow of data to actually get better outcomes and better models and better answers from protecting the interests of that particular unit, whether it's the country or the company. I actually don't know how this will play out. I think my view of the U.S. choice, it's a pullback to see how and give it time sort of incubate a little bit. But
Well, I mean, there are countries in the world that do demand that their data stay, particularly China.
Yeah.
But it's increasingly coming up as something that's seen as protecting individuals' privacy, et cetera. And yet at the same time, if you're going to build an international company, it's much easier when you can move data across borders.
Yeah, but I mean, I think a lot of people were pretty surprised and somewhat nonplussed by this announcement, because it is a reversal of 20, 30 years of pretty consistent advocacy, not just by the United States, but around the world, including in the APEC region. I mean, the Japanese government recently, as part of its chairing of the G7, had developed a whole process called open data based on trust, or open data flows based with trust, and for very good reason, because one of the principal things that has allowed for this eruption in innovation, communication, entrepreneurship around the world is the seamless flow of data across borders around the world, with the exception of China, which is pursuing a completely different internet paradigm, one which is, in a sense, walled off from the rest of the world. But for the rest of the world, it's been, for the last 20, 30 years, it's been an absolute mainstay of the approach that the free flow of data, much like the free flow of information, is the sort of elixir, if you like, of the internet. And the problem is, if you start down the slippery slope of one jurisdiction after the next saying, no, I want my sort of slice of the cake, and I'm going to hoard it for myself, is a whole bunch of things happen. Firstly, it becomes much easier for governments to surveil people's private data. It certainly inhibits global innovation. It certainly inhibits the free flow of information, of expression, of content. And I have to say, as a non-American, but someone who works for a great American company, it's a curious departure from something which has always been right at the heart of the US, and not just the US, APEC, European, and I've almost sort of almost a non-Chinese world view of the internet, which is that it is a global internet. It is open. It is open to those forces of free expression. So it was a surprising thing, and I hope it doesn't lead to a fragmentation of the internet in the years to come, the so-called splinternet that many people have spoken about. And I think that one of the greatest antidotes to the splinternet is the continued free flow of data across borders.
Where do you keep your data? Do you know? Do you think about it? Do you?
I got a lot of engineers who think a lot about it. But yeah, I mean, obviously for us, it's essential. Making our systems, making our technology smarter. I mean, my commentary on this discussion, obviously, these two gentlemen are a lot better positioned to comment on the global trends.
Right. But I'm just thinking more, you're going to want to grow, right?
Yeah.
I mean, someday you're going to be a big, huge international company with a huge market cap, right? And to what degree would it help if there's the ability to integrate data across borders?
No, I mean, 100%. I mean, look, every single one of our systems I can control from my smartphone, and there are a lot of advantages to that, but then there's also obviously risks, especially when you're dealing with something as critical as clean water and sort of the impact that has on people's health. But I think the comment I was going to make before is that just generally, as a child of refugees and immigrants to this country who came from countries where the free flow of anything was not really permitted, I generally sort of stray away from those types of policies. Soviet Union, yes. Soviet Union on one side. My mother was a child of Holocaust survivors on the other side.
Okay.
And look, I mean, again, kind of bringing it back to my industry, for the first time in 50 years, the United Nations had a water conference. You would think we'd be talking about something like water a little bit more frequently, given how many world conflicts right now are now caused by water, the amount of ethnic conflicts around the world where water, or the lack of access to water, or the prevention of access to water is a key contributor. We need to be working together, and I mean, that's why we're here. And I think that's what we're seeing, sort of a lot of these pronouncements this week are governments who are collaborating on addressing something that hasn't been mentioned here yet, but climate action, which is where our company comes in, we're going to need all hands on deck to be able to take it on.
How do you manage the fact that the impact of climate change is so different country to country when you're thinking about the way you expand your business and how you're going to solve for water issues?
Yeah, I mean, look, climate change generally is going to be felt most acutely and most immediately by the people who have the least amount of resources and means to be able to combat it. I mean, a lot of sort of the big issues we see with climate change are caused by a lot of the big countries who are represented at this conference. So it is a challenge, but I think a lot of sort of the models that we're developing here can be, as I said before, copy-pasted. You know, we got our start as a company developed to sort of focus on the developing world. And then we kind of shifted to focusing on big cities, developing these types of solutions that can then be transported all around the world. And that's what we did with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation through their Reinvent the Toilet Challenge.
So we've talked a lot about regulation, the interface of entrepreneurship and innovation with regulation. There's another arm of governments that impact innovation that we don't talk about as often, but I would argue the US Federal Reserve is having an impact on innovation. I mean, interest rates were extremely low for the last 30 years, and now they've gone up quite a lot. So you can buy a 2-year treasury and get a risk-free 5%. And that means every single other investment that you would have made must be 5% better than it was originally going to be, right? Because why would I risk here when I can have safety there? Now that interest rates are so much higher, Manny, are we going to see far fewer innovative companies as a result?
I'd say this is something that should be discussed. You know, the world has changed a bit the last couple of years from a seamless, global, frictionless world. You know, the 2010 to 2020, interest rates here never got above 2.5%. And so even if you look at the innovation issue and maybe why Silicon Valley and software, you know, if cost of capital is that low, your time to break even, your time to profitability, the slope of the J curve, your time to find product market fit you could take a while.
Infinite.
You know, you could take a while. You could have valuations as multiples of revenue, not multiples of EBITDA.
Eyeballs.
You know, so I actually think it's, and by the way, if you take a 50-year view, interest rates in the mid-single digits is very reasonable. It actually creates discipline to have some appropriate cost of capital. And so now it's you know, you can make a risk-free 5.5%. So just a lot of investors said, I'll just do that. Equity returns now probably have a shorter time horizon for you to get to cash flow profitability. So I do think this will, I don't know if I'd say it'll stifle innovation. It'll maybe it'll make us invest in companies that build sustainable water and beer rather than in software companies. But I think it's a reasonable. It'll actually put more discipline in the economy.
Aaron, could you have founded your company when you did if the cost of capital was as high as it is today? Would you have been able to get it off the ground?
The question implies that it was easy for me to raise money in the first place.
That's true, but you did.
We did, yes. No, I think it goes to Manny's point. I mean, I think this moment right now is reducing companies to the fundamentals. I mean, is it a good business? Mm-hmm. Are they able to actually demonstrate customer traction? Are the unit economics there? I think this moment is going to separate the great companies from the okay ones, and I think that's a fine thing to happen.
Do you see there's beer on the stage here?
There certainly is beer.
This is called Epic One Water Brew. What is this?
So we have a camera. Is the camera? Are we on this? So there's a silhouette of a building on this can. We are operating the first approved gray water recycling system in San Francisco in a 40-story high-rise with Related California, one of the biggest developers out there. And so we took laundry, shower water, and bathroom sink water, put it through our advanced purification process, and we said, you know what, you can tell people all day that it's really, really clean water. So we put it into a beer. 7,000 beers. And I thought it would be fun to bring these on stage.
There's no toilet water in here.
There's no toilet water on here. Just shower, just your run-of-the-mill shower water.
Are we allowed to taste it?
It's up to you.
I'm going to taste it.
Let's do it.
All right. Oh, it's messy.
Whoa. Is this the first beer at APEC?
I don't know. It's not going to be the last.
All right. Cheers.
Cheers.
Tastes very clean.
Very good.
Yeah, pretty good.
Gentlemen, thank you so much. Hope you enjoyed it. I did. Hope you did too. Please stick around for the next panel on AI.
Thank you, Michelle. This is
Thank
great.
you.
Thank you,
Thank you.
everybody.